Many of you may have seen a recent interview where two figures claiming to be Muslim leaders have made outrageous and sensational claims. Firstly, Muhammad Tawhidi. He has alleged that Muslims have a secret agenda to create their own Islamic country inside Australia. Now, this claim is not only outrageous, but completely baseless, as no evidence or proof was provided by Tawhidi. In fact, very little is actually known about this man and who exactly his followers are. After a quick online search, his so-called Islamic Association in South Australia seems to have only been set up last year, and the local community doesn't seem to be aware of its existence. His so-called Imams for Peace board that claims to be a community of faith leaders from around the world seems to have no other members but himself. One Path Network set out to find out who this man actually is, and after contacting the Australian National Imams Council, the peak body of Muslim imams in Australia, they revealed that this man is clearly not a recognised imam, sheikh or a Muslim leader. We also contacted the leader of the Imams Council of South Australia, Sheikh Amin Abu Samaha, who heads the largest mosque in the state, for a comment. He too clearly stated that Tawhidi is not a member of the Islamic leadership in South Australia and is in no way recognised. The second figure interviewed in the same segment is somewhat more notorious than Tawhidi. His name is Mustafa Rashid, and he is a well-known imposter who has falsely claimed in the past that he is the Mufti of Australia. This man is a proven fraud and a public liar who should in no way be used as a representative of the Muslim community. In fact, it was way back in 2014 that ANIC had publicly exposed this man for his fraudulent behaviour, saying he was not a recognised imam and it's not even known where he leads prayers. So it seems that this was nothing more than a sensationalised story, broadcast with no background checks and no due diligence, to create fearful hysteria and just grab attention. In this day and age where information flows freely, it's vital that we remember the Islamic and universal principle to verify any information that comes to us. And lastly, a message to anyone who felt worried, scared, or even angry after seeing that segment. Get to know your local Muslim community. Visit your local mosque, have a conversation, ask some questions. You'll find out for yourself what many already know, that there's nothing to fear from your Muslim neighbours.
Ms. Hanson, what is the basis of your Islamophobic feelings? Hate, fear, or ignorance?
If we had politicians like Pauline Hanson in Iraq, my hometown, we wouldn't have had ISIS come in.
And who want to live in peace and harmony in this country without fear. It's about us getting on together as a nation and working together with that fear amongst us. Why have we got so much fear?
Terror, terrorism, terror, terrorist, terror organization, terrorist attacks, terror.
Terrorism, terrorist organisations. Islamist fanatics, terrorism,
terrorist network, terrorist attacks, terrorist group, terrorists.
Palestine is Jewish land. I mean, come on, who doesn't know this? Jesus came to Jerusalem. He came to the Israelites who were there. It's Jewish land.
Islam in Australia is a minority religious affiliation. According to the 2011 Australian census, the combined number of people who self-identified as Muslim in Australia, from all forms of Islam, constituted 476,291 people, or 2.2% of the total Australian population. Regardless of what your thoughts are on Islam, the notions that Muslims are taking over Australia is completely absurd. But thanks to the manufactured war on terror, a wide array of false flag terror attacks, and a never-ending line of Hasbara shillery, the popularisation of Muslim bashing has been adopted by many politicians these days, including Pauline Hanson, who I believe was only successful this time around due to her newfoundly staunch support of the State of Israel. Mainstream media, ASIO and Zionists have brought us fake nationalism. I mean, let's face it, the LNP voters are starting to die of old age, and if it wasn't for the fake war on terrorism, people like Pauline Hanson, Andrew Bolt and their shill, Imam Tawhidi, would all have been exposed long ago. Have a think about it.
Let me think. Don't think. Feel.
It was very important that nationalism was repopularised. Despite there never being a terrorist attack in Australia by Muslim extremists in recent times, massive government resources are being ploughed into monitoring and surveillance of Muslim communities in Australia. and this has all been admitted previously by 4 Australian Prime Ministers. For some people, like Andrew Bolt and Pauline Hanson, that is just simply not enough. And to quote an article written by the Independent Australia last year, they claim, "There is not just Australian government surveillance of Muslims going on in Australia. There have been reports of Israeli spying on the Australian Muslim communities going on. In addition, both Saudi and Malaysian governments are also, according to many reports, spying on their own students in Australia. This is something the Australian government has known about for many years, but has done little, if anything, to curtail." When the Australian mainstream media are selectively picking an Imam to speak on behalf of the Australian Muslims, in regards to the wave of terrorist threats around the world, the man that's usually chosen is this guy called Imam Tawhidi, who was completely unknown and unheard of in the Muslim world until his face was made famous by the corporate Australian media, mostly dominated by Rupert Murdoch and Gina Rinehart, both of which benefit from pro-mining and anti-Muslim rhetoric. Tawhidi first came to public attention through a series of claims about Muslims conspiring to establish a taxpayer caliphate right here under our noses in Australia, where they wanted to rename streets after terrorist murderers, apparently. Some of Imam Tawhidi's infamous quotes include ones like, "I oppose constructions of mosques. ASIO should keep watch on Muslim religious leaders to see who funds them. And of course, Palestine is Jewish, who doesn't know this?" Yes, Australian Sheikh Mohammed Al-Tawhidi is a man whose devotion to Israel can be seen miles away. Yep, he is so convincing that the Goyim from around the world like to quote him when they are trying to make an attempt to slander Muslims. This is an Imam who criticizes Muslims for not drinking alcohol. This is an Imam who claims Islam is taking over Australia. This is an Imam who is calling for an investigation and a national inquiry into every single mosque and Muslim leader in the country. This is a man who most Muslims I talk to claim is a government shill. In fact, recently an Australian man called Mustafa Sahin made a video on his YouTube channel and claims that Imam Tawhidi is not only a fake, but is fully resourced and funded by the Australian intelligence agencies such as ASIO. And considering the evidence I've seen, I'd be fully inclined to agree with him. Back in March of this year, One Path Network wrote an article in response to a presentation by Today Tonight, an Australian TV show. Today Tonight depicted Islam as being incompatible with modern society and used 2 particular Muslim imams to perpetuate their bullshit. According to the article, one of the imams used in the segment, Mr. Mohammed Tawhidi, made the outrageous claim that Muslims in Australia are planning to create an Islamic state within Australia. Despite providing no proof for such a claim, his interview was aired to audiences around the country and it went viral all over social media. Little is known about Mr. Tawhidi and his followers. His centre, named the Islamic Association of South Australia, was only set up last year, and there is little to no information available about the centre and his attendees. When One Path Network approached the Australian National Imams Council, ANIC, for a comment, they stated that Mr. Tawhidi was not recognised as an Imam, Sheikh or a Muslim leader. ANIC is the official representative body of all Imams across Australia and has over 250 members, all Imams. The Imams Council of South Australia was also approached for a comment. Their leader, Sheikh Amin Abdulmala, who leads congregations at the largest mosque in South Australia, confirmed that he was not recognised and not part of the Islamic leadership in South Australia. Is it such a surprise that the only person who thinks this person is not an ASIO operative is Andrew Bolt? Imam Tawhidi has actually attempted to paint some credibility toward Pauline Hanson's political campaign, to the extent which they both seem to be making the same type of ludicrous claims against Islam. Both of these people are parroting the same rhetoric in front of the same media agencies around the same time. Both of them have called for a national inquiry into every single mosque in Australia. Both want to ban the burqa and the hijab, and claim that these type of veils have nothing to do with diversity or freedom of religious expression, but have more to do with the Islamization of Australia. However, seeing as both of them are calling for the suspension of Muslim immigration into Australia, you would assume that they would have at least some knowledge of the security exercises being carried out by ASIO, in which they themselves have claimed to be watching mosques. It should be no huge surprise that every single mosque in Australia is currently being watched, infiltrated and filmed by Australian intelligence and security agencies. But that still isn't enough for this duo. Is it any coincidence that both of these people are calling for the same things around the same time? Is it a coincidence that the only people who seem to take them seriously are those who probably watched the Bolt report? In fact, Imam Tawhidi is good mates with Andrew Bolt and the Gina Reinhardt posse at Channel 10. Mr. Andrew Bolt has even featured Imam Tawhidi on his television show.
That's what I'm saying, because this goes to the point whether Islam can be reformed.
Well, it has to reform, otherwise it won't survive.
Both men took the opportunity to talk about how Islam is completely incompatible with the Australian law. No real surprise, of course. There are huge ties between ASIO, Jewish Zionism and nationalism, and there have been for many years. Imam Tawhidi routinely uploads live chats on Facebook and his blog, in which he often answers the questions that his audience throws at him. To no surprise at all, I try to ask him a few questions, mostly regarding rumours that he was involved with ASIO and was trying to secularise Islam. As he spends a lot of his time calling on the Australian government and Australian intelligence agencies to make radical changes to the way they deal with Muslims. In the past, he has also admitted to, quote, enjoy a healthy relationship with various government departments in Australia, unquote. To look at it another way, let us consider the words expressed by Jonathan Azaizia back in June of 2017, who wrote, for those unaware, and the vast majority of even the most astute geopolitical analysts are indeed just that. Australia has literally outsourced its intelligence agencies and foreign affairs sovereignty to Israel and the Zionist-occupied American regime. This devastating information is compounded further by former Mossad Qatar Viktor Ostrovsky, who has disclosed that many segments of the Australian intelligence services reported directly to Mossad first, that the artificial Israeli regime has assets in ASIO and ISIS that pass everything on, and that the intelligence directorate of the genocidal Jewish gangster state is actively recruiting Zionism in the Australian Jewish community. Moreover, it cannot be forgotten that ASIO and ISIS have been actively aiding and abetting Tawhidi terrorists leaving Australia to go fight in Syria to overthrow the democratically elected government of Bashar al-Assad. In other words, Tawhidi is a darling of the intelligence services which back the very extremists he claims to oppose. Considering how he carries water for world Zionism by working with its Western proxies, promoting its divide and conquer sectarian agenda and furthering its anti-Islamic crusade, it should come as no surprise whatsoever that Tawhidi openly, unashamedly, defends the usurping Zionist entity's existence by making the tired, old, debunked and laughable claim that God gave the land to the people of Israel. He pals around with Israeli Jewish terrorist Avi Yemeni, a rabid Islamophobe who runs a gym called IDF Training, and they've spoken together at many Muslim bashing events. Tawhidi's also been endorsed as of recently by the likes of fake Muslims and fraudsters such as Ayn Harizi Ali, as well as Lebanese-Canadian Zionist Jew Gad Saad, two of the most prominent personalities in the entire Islamophobia industry. And with these two parasites now firmly in his camp, you can be best sure that the monies of Nina Rosenwald and her sister Elizabeth Ferret, the Chereniks, Seth Klarman, and plenty of the other fantastical anti-Islamic Jewish gazillionaires can't be too far away. Or perhaps such Zio cash is knocking on his door already and simply hasn't come to light as of this moment. It should also be noted that Avi Yemeni is a staunch supporter and advocate for the one and only Pauline Hanson. Unsurprisingly, Tawhidi's tales about Sunni Muslims' shadowy plot to instate caliphates have been enthusiastically embraced by the far right, including Reclaim Australia. When you look at the foundations of organisations like the English Defence League and even the Australian Defence League, it's undeniable that much of these organisations' origins are found in both the military and political Zionism. Even the original Great Aussie Patriot who led the ADL had an unusual fixation with Israel. There was a surprising and unusual revelation made by a Zionist Facebook page. This Facebook page, known as the Australian Jewish Communal Lobby, had generously offered to fully fund defence costs of any Reclaim Australia protester who was arrested. There was also another post made a few months earlier, a video directed at strengthening the Jewish ties to Australia, with a whopping 500 likes. It seems that the Australian Jewish Communal Lobby had a fair stint of support from its Zionist audience. Rabbi Joseph Gutnick, aka Diamond Joe, the master of the alleged affinity stock scams. Diamond Joe is a prominent member of Melbourne's Jewish community. Joseph is the official head of Chabad Lubavitch's Rabbis for Victoria. He also currently resides in Singapore. The Australian mining magnate and corporate predator is reputedly the richest man in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish world. Joseph has had an extensive history with money politics, pouring millions of dollars into nationalist political parties in Australia and Israel, including over $1 million of his personal funds into the Likud campaign of Benjamin Netanyahu. Mordecai Gutnick, brother of Joseph Gutnick, currently serves as a member of the rabbinical court Beth Din in Melbourne. He is an authority in the field of kashrut and has been a rabbinic administrator for the Kosher Australian Agency since 1997. Mordecai Gutnick, like his father before him, served as a military chaplain in the Australian Army. So, this family is very influential and has connections to financing nationalist political parties and movements in Australia and Israel in the past. They have a direct connection to the Australian military and make up a part of the most highest forms of rabbinical leadership in the world. They have deep connections to mining, oil, banking, and they oversee the entire kosher process in Australia, etc. They truly are a very powerful and influential family who have huge trail of court cases behind them, involving things like fraud, pedophilia cover-up, suing Aussie patriots like Neil Erickson only then to drop the charges to have them fully support the cause of Israel, and having that being expressed by the great Aussie patriot thereafter as a result, and much, much more. I don't even have the time to get into the full extent to which this family has power over money politics in Australia and abroad, and yet you hardly ever hear the media talk about them. This Imam Tawhidi is a walking, talking contradiction, because he claims to be against Sharia law, but as a Shia Muslim, he prays every single day for the awaited Mahdi as to re-emerge and rule the whole entire world based on what? Sharia law. Unless, of course, this guy doesn't pray at all and is a fake Muslim. So which is it? The Quran actually says that anyone who tries to make something halal into something haram, or anyone who tries to take something that's haram and turn it into something halal, is an infidel. And of course these words are expressive of people like Imam Tawhidi, a man who claims to represent Islam, although he seems to be a walking, talking contradiction. It should be no surprise that so many Muslims are calling Imam Tawhidi a complete fraud. Hopefully this illustrates that the only people who think Imam Tawhidi is real is people like Andrew Bolt, Gina Rinehart and Rupert Murdoch, who completely control the media in Australia. It's these people and their Zionist agents who seem to parade this man around like a hero, as if he is the representation of what Islam should be. It's also worth noting that Imam Tawhidi claims to have run Qom departments for Iraqi students from 2010 to 2013 and cites an array of well-established scholars that he studied under. In reality, however, the Qom authorities kicked Tawhidi out a short time after his entry for promoting what they call deviant currents.
Thank you.
What does that mean?
It means may God curse you, you pig, you dog.
And as we have just seen, with this strong case presented against him, not only is he a deviant, but he is most likely an agent for the State of Israel, working in par with AGO.
Circumstances.
On paying over $500 million to a PR firm to create fake terrorist videos.
You okay? 5 minutes.
Under those circumcision.
This is why. Less circumstances. This is why.
This is why we see you and your allies, the Ayunis, the only responsible. I said Ayunis, right? I said Ayunis. Zionist.
Right, I saw that. That was one of these dozens and dozens and dozens of false flag stories that we report on over at False Flag Weekly News. And that's also well documented. That's not one that anybody's arguing didn't happen. So the idea that terrorism is being used clandestinely.
This is why we see you. Halla Samir, halla! We see you and your allies, the Zionists, the only responsible of the killing of the
treasonous governments are carrying out these policies is because they do not represent us, they represent the bankers, and the bankers make a hell of a lot of money off of war, and more importantly, as long as we're all fighting each other, as long as we're all not trusting each other, as long as we're all simply being played as pawns over and over, then they can maintain this tyrannical system of never-ending war. So this is really the wake-up call. What has happened in Paris is us. We are responsible through our corrupt governments for all of these policies, and even if these individuals who carried this out are not directly working for Mossad, CIA, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all the same thing, even if they did this organically of their own volition, believe me, that is exactly what our so-called governments want. That is what the policy that we've been fostering over and over. And quite frankly, if we're to look at ISIS, ISIS stands for Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. They never attack Israel, and that in itself also tells you a lot about who these individuals are.
Well, some of the events there, Ken O'Keefe, that our guest Rodney Martin talks about in terms of Islamophobia being created again, or more policies to exercise against Muslims, well, maybe this is what the intent is behind these attacks. If there are any hands at play behind the scenes of some of the countries involved in this so-called war on terror.
Well, indeed, that's the case, and it's just more of the same now, isn't it? Now, I'm a non-Muslim, and I am angry at the way Muslims have been portrayed around the world. I have lived in Muslim lands, and I have experienced some of the greatest hospitality and generosity that you will ever experience, and yet Muslims in general are being associated with this monstrosity, this most recent monstrosity known as ISIS, which again I say is Israeli Secret Intelligence Service, and also Al-Qaeda previous to that, Al-Nusra Front. All of these things are intended to smear Islam as a whole, 1.8 billion people on this planet, to associate them with this sort of madness, when in fact it is us in the West that are creating this stuff, funding it, very much protecting it. In fact, America has been providing air cover to these psychopaths in Syria and Iraq largely, and we see that when Russia comes in and actually does something constructive, look how long many of these men are shaving their beards and running off with their heads, tails between their legs. It is really, really, really disgusting that people have been conned into thinking that Muslims have anything to do with this. And let us harken back to the original incident which has caused this madness known as the War on Terror. The so-called 19 hijackers in Osama bin Laden is one of the greatest fairy stories ever created. The idea that this man in a cave in Afghanistan on dialysis was masterminding this incredible operation in the United States with 19 so-called hijackers wielding box cutters, Mohammed Atta among them, snorting cocaine and hanging out with strippers in Florida, that these people are responsible for this event in defiance of the greatest military machine in the history of mankind, never mind all of the evidence that's come forward that makes the official version of 9/11 beyond ridiculous. Muslims did not carry out 9/11. In fact, those who blame the Muslims, primarily the Jewish supremacist Zionist-controlled media of America and the government which is controlled by these Jewish supremacist Zionists in America, all of them parrot the same ridiculous, tired old line that Muslims are responsible. And this is an agenda which is intended to create a clash of civilizations. And if we are smart as people, we're going to see the agenda for what it is, and we're going to realize that those who are collaborating in this agenda need to be held to account for literal war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I'm including in that not just the politicians and the military, but those in the media who have perpetuated these lies, because there is no way that they could possibly believe this nonsense. These people have literally sold their soul to the service of the devil.